What are two things that all new believers need in order to be successful in their Christian life? That's what we're going to discover in this passage today. So stick around. Hi there, I'm Ryan Kilgore, and welcome to In the Bible. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. I know that if your heart is open to God, He is going to bless you as we study His Word together. If you like this video, please consider clicking that like button down below. You may even want to subscribe to my channel as well. Today we're going to do some devotional Bible study. And this is the way that you might read the Bible yourself as part of your own daily devotional routine. Now, there's a couple ways that you can use this video. You can just watch and listen as I explain some of the things in the text and share my own experience. But another way that you can use this video is you can pause the video after I explain a few things and after we read the text together. And you can spend a few minutes rereading that text, meditating on it, reflecting on it, praying about it, and seeing what God has to say to you through this passage. I sure hope that if you do that, that you will leave a comment down below and share with me what you heard God saying to you. Now, the passage that we're going to read together today is found in the book of Colossians, chapter 1, and verses 9 to 12. And this text, like many that the Apostle Paul wrote, can be a little bit complicated. There's a lot of words there all packed in together. But once we break it down, you'll find that it's actually fairly simple. And I hope that you'll stick around until the end, because I'm going to share with you one really interesting thing that I think will be a big encouragement to you. Are you ready? Let's get stuck in. So in the book of Colossians, the Apostle Paul, along with his co-worker Timothy, is writing to a group of believers in the ancient city of Colossae. That's in modern-day Turkey or ancient Asia Minor. And he's heard about their faith, and so he writes to them, and he begins by commending them for the things that he's heard and wishing them well. And that's actually a standard part of the way people would write letters in the ancient world. That's a standard opening to a letter. And so the Apostle Paul is writing here, and in this passage we're going to read today, he points out two important things that every believer needs to have and that he wishes that these believers will have. And he makes this into a prayer. He tells them what he's praying for them. So see if you can follow his train of thought as we read this together. So let's read together our text from Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 to 12. And so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of His will, in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. May you be strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. All right, I hope you didn't get lost there. It is a little bit technical kind of writing. We're not quite used to complicated sentences like this anymore today, so it's easy to get lost. But let's break it down together and help to make sense of it. All right, I want you to notice right at the beginning that this whole section is basically a description of the prayer that Paul and Timothy have for these believers. And it's basically just two sentences or two ideas. Actually, in Greek, it's just one long sentence. But here in this translation, it's broken down into two sentences. And I think that there are basically two ideas here. And all of the details there are just additions and qualifications to help us understand those two main ideas. So if we break it down here into those two main ideas, that's going to help us to understand it better, and then we're going to be able to hear God speak to us a little bit better through this passage. So the first of these two ideas is in verse 9, where the Apostle Paul is expressing his prayer and his request to God that they would be filled. And then the second one is down in verse 11, where he says, may you be strengthened. All right, now let's go back to that first part and let's break it down a little bit and explain all the details that are in there so that it makes sense. So it begins with his request on behalf of the believers. He's asking that you may be filled, And so the question then is, well, filled with what? And what he says next explains what he wants them to be filled with. And so he says, with the knowledge of his will. That's what he wants them to be filled with. And then he says, in all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And so this again explains what he means by being filled with the knowledge of his will. It needs to be done with wisdom, with understanding, and he points out that it is a spiritual endeavor, so with spiritual wisdom and understanding. And then he says in verse 10, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. So here he's explaining again this initial request that they be filled with the knowledge of his will. And what he's answering here is the reason for why they need to be filled with the knowledge of his will. Why do they need to know what God's will is? It's so that they can walk in it, or so they can live according to it in a way that is pleasing to their Lord, he says, fully pleasing to him. Then he goes on and he says, bearing fruit in every good work. In other words, it produces results. And he says, increasing in the knowledge of God. So it continues to grow, it has growth. So all of these things are a big explanation or an elaboration on that main request that he's making, that they would be filled with the knowledge of his will. Why do they need to be filled with the knowledge of his will? What does that mean? What will the results be? They're all explanations to that main point. Okay, so let's go down to verse 11 for the second part here, where Paul says, may you be strengthened. And then he says, with all power according to his glorious might. So he wants them to be strengthened. And then he explains further how much he wants them to be strengthened, or how much power they need. He says, with all power according to his glorious might. So according as much power as God has, as much glory and might as God has, that's how much power they need to be strengthened with. And then he says, for all endurance and patience with joy. So again here, he's explaining more, he's elaborating. Why do they need to be strengthened? They need to be strengthened so that they will have patience, so that they will have endurance with joy. And finally, he says, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. So again, he's further elaborating. What does it mean to have patience and endurance with joy? It means to give thanks to the Father who has provided everything for you. All right, you see, it's not so complicated. Be filled with the knowledge of his will and live according to it. Be strengthened for endurance and patience with joy. These are the things that the Apostle Paul and his co-worker Timothy want the believers in Colossae to have in their lives, and they're asking God to do that for them. And these are the things that we need in our lives as well. Now, as you reflect on this passage that we've read together, what is it that sticks out to you, and what is the message that you hear God speaking to your life today through this passage? Leave me a short comment just down below, and let me know what you're hearing from God in this passage. Okay, so now let me share a couple things that really spoke to me from this passage, and then I'm going to share with you one really interesting thing from the very last verse in this passage that I think will really be an encouragement to you. So the first thing that really stuck out to me in this passage was there in verse 9, where the Apostle Paul is asking God, he's explaining his prayer, asking that they would be filled with the knowledge of his will. And as a Christian, I want to have a knowledge of God's will. I want to live a life that is worthy of the God that I serve, that reflects his character. I want to grow in my knowledge of him and in my relationship with him. I want to know what his will is. But I need to know his will more than just the general sense, where I know his general will for people generally. As part of a relationship with him, I want to know what his will is for my life in particular. And I see here that the Bible sets this passage as a model for the prayer that I can pray as well. And so I'm asking God, what is your will for my life? How are you leading in my life? What are the things that you want me to work on? What are the plans and the goals that you want me to pursue? I want to know what God's will is, and so I'm making that my prayer because I see that modeled here in this passage. Okay, so the second thing in this passage that spoke to me was in the Apostle Paul's prayer for these believers, that they would have endurance and patience, and in their patience that they would give thanks. Well, why should I give thanks, or why should they give thanks? Well, here's what his answer is. He says, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. And here is this really interesting thing that was encouraging to me, and I think it will be encouraging to you as well. How does someone become qualified, as he says here, to receive an inheritance? Well, it's only by being a child, right? A son or a daughter. It is the children who are qualified to receive an inheritance from their parents. And if he says here that God has qualified us, qualified me and you as well, to receive an inheritance, that can only mean that we are his children, that he has adopted us into his family. And as a person who has accepted his life in the place of mine, I have received that gift. I am his child. My place with him is secure, and my inheritance is certain. And if God's word says that I need something like a knowledge of his will so that I can live in a way that reflects him and that is worthy of him, if it says that I need endurance and patience, then I can go to him knowing that he will give me what I ask for, because I'm his child and he loves me. And so I can go to him knowing that he's going to give me what I ask for if it's in harmony with his will, which if I'm praying for something that the Bible tells me that I need, then I can know already that it's in harmony with his will, and I can trust that he's going to answer that prayer. And so I'm asking for these things today in my life as a result of studying this passage. And I hope that you will make this your prayer as well, that you will pray for these things that we all need as believers and as followers of God in order to be successful in our Christian life, just like the believers in Colossae needed these things in their lives so many years ago. Pray for these things. Ask God to do them for you and to fulfill them in your life. Pray about anything else that you heard God speak to you through this passage. And when you pray, trust that he will give you what you ask for, because you're asking in harmony with his will, and because you know that he loves you and you are his adopted child, his son or his daughter. All right, thank you so much for joining me for this study today. I sure hope that you were blessed. I hope that your knowledge and understanding of God's word has grown as a result of our study together. If it did, then please click the like button down below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel as well, and if you click that bell icon, then you'll get a notification every time I upload a new study or a new video. And I also invite you to follow me on Instagram or Facebook as well. If you have any thoughts to share, or if a question has come up in your mind as you've watched, please just leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video and on the passage that we've studied together. I really hope that you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.